The previous company I was in, we would have meetings like all the time.
There's no purpose to that. Half of the people won't be listening, they'll be doing something else. I want my team to be accountable and I want them to feel like ownership in the business. And it turns out that maybe the founder is behaving like a micromanager.
It's your responsibility to build the best team.
As soon as you start putting your brand and your idea out into the world, that's when culture starts. Not when you make your first hire.
Like, what does that mean? Like, how do you create that?
Where those that we hire aren't yes people. There's healthy challenge. Connection is built through conversations. People are really challenging what it means to have a benefit and a perk these days. It costs about 25k to fully onboard someone. I think one of the first things that you start to see is misalignment. And that's when you start to see marketing and sales are clashing. That's really hard for early stage startups.
You're being left exposed. Natalie, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm really good. Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
My absolute pleasure. I put something out on LinkedIn and basically asking people if they knew any guests and things like that. Got so many likes and comments and things like that. So thank you so much for everyone. But your name came up more than once. So I was like, okay, I need to get Natalie on.
Yeah.
So before we jump in, what's your background?
So my background's actually in design. So digital products and service design and digital transformation strategy. So that's what I came out, well, not exactly came fresh out of uni and started that. I ended up in that through like a graduate scheme at like NatWest Bank and found that that was the space that I really, really loved. But where it kind of really became exciting was when I moved out of in-house and into a newly formed agency as like employee number 3 and was working with lots of different clients to look at their customer experience and improve it or build new products and services. And that was exciting because the creative problems were exciting, but it was also exciting because being so early in that team, I was able to help like build what we were going to become and what type of team we were going to be. And that then got me really excited about this concept of culture design. So I'd never really thought of culture as a design practice. In my experience, it'd always been like HR, which felt something was like, that was much more formal. So that kind of opened my eyes to, I guess, what has become more of my career now.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So what is company culture and why is it important? Because I think I know a lot of people listening are thinking about building teams and things like that. And when you're building a team, when you just started a business, there is no HR. You are HR as the founder. So it's your responsibility to build the best team. So why does culture matter?
Yeah. So culture matters to any stage of company, because as soon as you start putting your brand and your idea out into the world, that's when culture starts. Not when you make your first hire, because culture and brand are very interlinked. So how a customer experiences your brand should marry up with how you work as a team behind the scenes. And what I mean when I talk about culture, I think the simplest summary is it's the way we do things around here. I guess if I want to build that out and get a bit nerdy, what I like to talk about is culture being like a social contract that everyone in your team kind of agrees to, and it states this is the way in which we're going to behave in order to be successful towards this shared mission or shared goal. So it's bringing people together to achieve something and kind of having a way of doing that you're all like, yeah, we tolerate this, or like we celebrate this, we don't tolerate that. And because of these things, we're going to be more successful and be able to work together. And the reason why it's so important to think about when you're building a startup, even in the early stages, is so often you will just be going, go, get the product to launch, product market fit. And that can be really, really great, right? And your team can feel really connected through that. But often what happens is there gets a point when things start to slow down and delivery starts to not be as effective, or like it's taking longer, there's more issues. And whilst of course there could be like tech and financial issues that are causing that, often it's team issues. And then by that time you've created what we like to call cultural debt, and it's harder to undo it. So the earlier you can be intentional about this is how we're going to work together, the more likely you are to kind of be hit in the face by that moment of like slowing down and things not working as well.
Because it's one of the last things that startups think about. Because as you said, they think about product, they think about the tech, they think about their like funding runway. There's so many different things that they think about before culture and team actually come into it. And so I'm interested to hear, because you talked about cultural debt. I've never heard that term before. So like, why should they think about it now and not have to, like, what's the problems that could arise essentially?
Yeah, so I think you're absolutely right. Culture isn't necessarily like super front of mind for startup founders. I do think that's changing a little bit. Like, I do think there are more and more founders that are thinking about it early on. And I think that there are more investors that are looking at not only team culture, but leadership culture, and like how that's working together as like an expectation through the journey. So there's that. I just wanted to make a comment on how I do think that's shifting a bit. The problems that arise, I think one of the first things that you start to see is misalignment. So especially as a team starting to grow, maybe you were all one team before and now you've got like marketing and sales and like tech. And if we haven't thought about our collaboration rituals, the way in which we're going to bring all of these different teams together, misalignment can start to come out. And that's when you start to see like, you know, marketing and sales are clashing because sales think we should be going over here and marketing's looking at a completely different ideal customer profile, or product are getting really frustrated with engineering because engineering are focusing on tech debt and product know that they need a new feature out. So I think that misalignment is one of the first thing that comes out, and then the problems kind of snowball from there. So if you've got conflict between all of these teams, you're going to slow down. Like, you're not going to be able to deliver at the same speed because you're wasting time in these in this conflict. So there's that. I think also there is something to be said about how customers see you. And we know that customers are looking to engage more with good companies, what they perceive to be good companies. You know, Uber, Revolut have all gone through a period of being in the papers for having a negative culture and people perceiving them differently as a result of that, or I should say a very cutthroat culture, and people being like, oh, I don't know if I want to support that. So I think that there is maybe further down the line, it's probably not as early on, there's going to be tension potentially with your customers as well, where they're saying, hold on, this brand that's all singing and dancing doesn't seem to be marrying up with my experience of the customer service team, for example. So I think that it kind of starts within and it kind of starts to go out and out further and becomes more of an external problem as well.
Yeah. But the 2 points that you've made, so one being so misalignment in terms of teams, I think is obviously super valid. And then you have the external pressures of, not external pressure, but external reputation of if you have bad sort of internal practices within your team, that definitely, I'd say definitely more now than before, people come out and talk about it, and it is in the papers. It's more sort of external than it was before. But what I will say, like, just, I guess those two things possibly are more detrimental once you're more mature as a company. So is it like, if you're a startup, literally like a few people, would you say that company culture, like the reason why it's important to think about it now is because you're setting that foundation so that the stuff that stuff that you just mentioned doesn't happen in the future?
Yeah, definitely. Like it is definitely a setting yourself up for future success. I think that something that maybe is more relevant to like your much, much smaller teams is, and I'm speaking here from a point of view that I'm a team of 4. And I know that if our ways of working aren't gelling with the people that we've brought into the team, they're much more likely to leave. And that is a really costly problem for early stage startups.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think actually The Guardian did a study that said that found that it costs about 25k to fully onboard someone to a level that they're like at considered full productivity. And I know it's really hard to link that back. Like, you're not paying 25k out, but it's like, if you think about your time as a founder investing in someone, building them up to a level of productivity, or getting someone else to do that, or the kind of back and forth that you do, or the finding of them as well. I think that that's really hard for early stage startups, because you need these unicorn generalist people that can do a bit of everything. And there's not loads of them. It's hard. It's harder to kind of bring a specialist into that space, because they're less likely to do all of the other things that maybe are outside of their typical job spec. So I think the risk of like retention is a big one, and something that certainly worries me as an early stage founder, because I've found these brilliant people. If like one of them, or God forbid both of them, left, I would feel like really panicked about how to find the right person to replace them.
No, it's extremely valuable, especially like because those first few hires are so like costly as like a percentage of your overall sort of runway. And so if you get that wrong, and one of the reasons you can get that wrong is to not have a good
100%.
culture, and then they walk away, you're like, you're being left exposed.
Yeah.
Because it's like, wow, like, I now have to hire someone else, go through that process. And if the culture's wrong, then that new person might leave as well. So it's kind of like, you have to get that right very early on, which is, completely true. So let's talk about good company culture now. How do you, as a company, as a founder, have a good company? Like, what does that mean? Like, how do you create that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And in all honesty, it's quite a tricky question, because it does differ from company to company. What's good for one company from a cultural perspective might actually be a nightmare for another company.
Yeah.
And so there is definitely nuance. I think that there are foundations that make a good kind of baseline from a cultural perspective. So it's thinking about things like psychological safety. Like, how can we create an environment as founders where those that we hire aren't yes people? They will actually come to us with the reality of a situation. They won't sugarcoat it. There's healthy challenge. I think that's really important. As founders, sometimes we can almost create our own little echo chambers for ourselves and see things in certain ways, because we're so wedded to the idea. And I think something that's been incredibly valuable, again, from my journey of hiring people into our company, is having someone that can hold a mirror up and say, actually, are you sure we want to do this? Have you thought about it this way? And they can only do that if they feel psychologically safe to do that. So there's no fear of judgment, or am I going to lose my job if I challenge the founder? So that's one that I think is incredibly important. There's also things about obviously inclusion, making sure it's linked to psychological safety. So making sure that people can bring their full selves to work and feel comfortable doing that, and being authentic and all of that good stuff. I think also we have to challenge ourselves to think about how we often as founders expect growth mindset, but how do we create a space where that's encouraged and rewarded and celebrated? So those are like 3 pillars, for example, that always come front of mind for me when I'm thinking about the startup side of things. There's actually 10 pillars that we assess within our organization. So I'm trying not to just list out every single one of them. But I guess one more that I'd like to add in is empowerment. So having a clear way that we create autonomy within our teams. Something that I often hear the founders that we work with talk about is, I want my team to be accountable, and I want them to feel like ownership in the business and treat it like it's their own. And sometimes when we question them about that, it turns out that maybe the founder is behaving like a micromanager and directly undermining what the outcome that they would like to achieve. So I think actually being intentional and specific about how you empower people in your team, and you can like create systems and processes around that, is really, really important as well.
That's great. Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think that growth pillar that you just talked about, I think for a startup, that's probably the most important. I mean, and the accountability stuff I think is massively important as well, because they feel more involved in the growth side of things. So for out of all the pillars that you just mentioned, I guess, what's the one that you feel like most companies miss?
I am actually thinking of some that I didn't mention. So I think the growth is probably like a growth mindset is probably something that a lot of startup founders have front of mind when they're hiring.
Yeah.
So I don't think that sometimes comes up as an issue later down the line when the team's bigger and they're maybe not seeing as much of what they expect growth to look like in practice. I think that one of the things that I see miss most often, which is another pillar, is communication. So having a really clear approach to how you communicate across, different levels of urgency, but also across different platforms. Like, when do you all have to come together? When do you work asynchronously?
Yeah.
When are decisions made across that? I think communication is one of the hardest and biggest challenges that a lot of the startups that we work with come across. And interestingly, just because you're a smaller team doesn't mean that communication isn't an issue. Like, you can have a communication issue between two people. So I think that is something that is really pervasive across, in fact, all organizations. Like, we tend not to work with bigger multinational companies, but I think if you looked at most corporates, they would have a communication issue as well.
Okay, so we talk about communication, and I agree. It's one of the most important pillars of a startup, of any company. But there's so many now different ways to communicate. So you have asynchronous, you have in person, you have remote, there's so many like remote meetings, and obviously COVID's changed a lot of things. So when it comes to like in person versus remote, asynchronous versus synchronous, what works the best, and what combination works the best?
It's another one of those answers where it depends on the company. There are always going to be some companies that like in person is like a really big thing for them, and some companies that completely rely on in person, right? I think that in the world that we work in, we're working with more remote and hybrid companies. And I think that having a balance between synchronous and asynchronous, and having a balance of, when people can work from home and work flexibly and also come together, I think having a balance of that is the important thing. So I think that whilst I fully support fully remote companies, I think those companies should be prioritizing moments maybe once a year or twice a year. Some companies do it quarterly, where they are bringing their entire team together in person to connect. We facilitated a retreat for a company last year who was fully remote. A lot of people had never met before. They were all over the world, and they brought their entire team together in Turkey for 4 days, and we facilitated a number of workshops with them. It was actually called a culture hackathon because it was a very techie team. We were like, we want to develop real, tangible cultural rituals or products or like tools that you can take back into your work that will address some of the issues that we identified, or the challenges that we identified on the first day of the retreat. And seeing the difference between day one, when everyone's like just meeting each other for the first time in person, and seeing the real beautiful connection by the end of those 4 days was honestly magical. And I know that I know that it's easy for me to say I was there, but like I genuinely felt a bit emotional by the end of it, seeing that connection grow and seeing that shared understanding, especially when you're working with people across different countries. Like people brought along like their national dishes, and they brought along little gifts from their country to share with their colleagues. And it was just such a beautiful moment of connection, but also it has a real impact afterwards. So Atlassian did a report recently that found that those kind of retreats and those team away days can have a positive impact on collaboration up to 6 months after that retreat. And our client that we worked with was saying that that feeling was immediate once they got back. So I think that for me, it's not like one or the other. It's like, if we're going to be a fully remote team, how can we create those moments of connection, both remotely, but also have time where we can bring everyone together? And if we are like being very open about being in a hybrid space, maybe, people work at home, but we also have an office, rather than just saying everyone needs to come back to the office. Let's think about how we can be more intentional about why we're bringing people to the office at given moments. Is it because we want to collaborate? Is it that we purely want to connect? Like, that's a really good reason to bring people together. Is it to make decisions? Is it to be inspired? I think that it's the why behind how we bring people together is what's really important. And I guess that's a really long answer to what was quite a specific question of what's the best model. But I guess what I'm trying to get to is that there isn't a one size fits all. Like, every company is different because every individual needs within a company is different. But I think as founders and leaders, we need to constantly be thinking, what's the best way in which my team can communicate, collaborate, connect, be inspired, learn together? And what does that look like across remote, hybrid, in-person, asynchronous, synchronous? Because that question, if you get that question right for your organization, that's what delivers a high-performing team.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think if you balance it correctly, you have a team that like fight for one another, which is a really beautiful thing, because that's exactly the sort of culture you want to build. I have a question though around meetings. So the previous company I was in is a large company, of course, but we have meetings like all the time. And it just seemed, there's a lot of people on meetings. And I always think like, each person in this room right now, maybe we had like 2 weekly calls with about 15 people, and it was 15 very senior people. And I was just always thinking like, how much does this meeting cost?
Yeah.
Twice a week, so times by 2. So how much does this meeting cost on a weekly basis? And honestly, it's like a huge sum of money. And I always thought like, is it actually useful? Because they just go around the room and basically update each other on what their team is doing. Now, what is the balance between meeting? I know we talked about, I guess, more in person versus remote, but I mean, you can have meetings across both. So more around the communication style, how do you get that balance correct?
Meetings are such yes, I have such a bugbear about meetings, and we're actually working with a client at the moment who we're working with their team to develop like an actual meeting charter of like, what are the reasons to meet, guidelines for like things to consider before you book a meeting. And for some people that sounds really overkill, but in a post-COVID world, I don't think it's overkill at all, because the default now is to jump on a meeting. And because we're not in the office, where if you saw someone in a meeting room all day, you'd be like, are you okay? Like, that feels really intense. Because we're not in the office, people are getting booked out back to back. That didn't happen in the same way when we were in the office. I think people did kind of book in breaks a bit more. Okay, there's always exceptions to the rule, but I think generally we were a bit better at it. So I think in this world, we do need to be specific and intentional about when we have meetings and why. And that example that you gave of everyone going on a call and giving an update, do that asynchronously. There's no purpose to that. It's half of the people won't be listening. They'll be doing something else. When it comes to your update, you probably haven't prepared for it. So it's not really the most valuable thing that you could be doing. So I think that getting to an agreement of why we meet is really important. So for the client that we're working with now, we're currently experimenting with 4 reasons to meet. So to decide, to connect, to learn, to do. To do is actually one that's getting challenged at the moment, because we're like, well, if it's to do, is it something that we can update asynchronously? But we were thinking in that bucket, it was more about like your stand up, for example. So running through quickly, this is what I'm doing today or this week, and this is what I need help with. Whereas to decide is something that's big, strategic, like it's going to impact the course of action, and then everyone's going to navigate towards that. To learn, there is a lot of value in collective learning, because it means that you can follow up and test each other afterwards. And there's a lot to be said about how you can then put that into practice when you're doing that as a collective. And to connect is to connect. Like, we do need to connect with our colleagues in a way to like build those relationships, build that camaraderie. Now, if I said to you that meeting that you just had in mind, does that fit into any of those buckets?
No, I wouldn't say so.
So I would say kill it. So
Yeah.
this is the process that we're going
Or
through.
make it like less regular.
Yeah,
perhaps.
exactly.
But that's if you make it less regular, it's more about the connection
Yeah.
side of things, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And there's time and space for that. But like, connection isn't built in everyone going around a room saying, this is what I'm working on. Connection is built through conversations and, you know, sharing and like vulnerability. So if the purpose is to connect, then I would redesign that meeting entirely. I think there is value in updates, don't get me wrong, but I think updates should generally be an asynchronous thing. That's maybe my preference. I'm yet to be convinced that updates, purely for the sake of updates, are valuable, like bringing everyone together. And I think we also need to question how many people are on a meeting. Can we really get that much done with 15 people on a call?
Yeah, I mean, some people were in person, some people were remote, so it was like a hybrid thing. It originated with only maybe 10 people, then more people got brought in. It was just once a week, but then we couldn't fit it all in once a week. So, because it was just update, like people were going around, but we didn't have enough time because people would ask questions and stuff like that. So they put it to like 2 hours, like 1 hour, like another 1 hour. So it was 2 hours a week. It just seemed like overkill, honestly. And it seemed like as soon as you were out the room, you just forgot as soon as it was finished.
Yeah.
And the notes were always like circulated. So it was like, well, we could have just read it in the first place, you know?
I think like if anyone listening is feeling that strain, and as you start to, you know, scale and grow and things get more complex, you will start to feel that meeting strain, and the team will start to feel it. And the team then are questioning like the job that they're doing, because they're like, I didn't sign up to be on meetings. I just signed up to create something and deliver something. And so I think as soon as you feel that, bring your team together, or like get your teams to come together and talk about it and say, what is a good reason to meet? Agree on like what that looks like for you, and then start to like trial more asynchronous ways of doing things if they don't fit into that category. So at the moment with the company that we're working with, we are reviewing all of their meetings, and there's 3 potential actions that can come out of it. It's either removed, it's refined, or it's reduced. And I think that if we can be quite cutthroat with that, we can really overcome this like meeting overload that is so easy to fall into, but so negative to our productivity and our impact that we make.
No, I completely agree. One last question I want to finish off with. In your experience, because you've been doing this for like, I think you said 3 years, right? But then also like in not your own business before that. So you've been doing it for a while, both before COVID and after COVID. I'm really interested to hear, how have you seen good company culture change within the last like 5, 6, 7 years?
It's a really good question. And I have to be honest with you, my perspective on what culture is and what good culture is has evolved in that time. I think that prior to COVID, I saw good culture as camaraderie, as like friendship, as like going on socials and having a laugh with my coworkers. And when we were all mass forced to go into to work from home, that all fell apart. And it was like, okay, if we don't have that, what do we have with regards to culture? And I think a lot of companies have felt that. So I'm saying that, like, I didn't get that light bulb moment until the situation that we were forced in, and I was working in that space. So maybe I was a bit late to the party, but hey ho. I think how good culture is changing is that it's becoming something that is, or is something that's, it should be something that's much more tangible. It is a strategic driver for our business. It is something that should be at the top table in boardrooms and exec rooms. And it is something that can be really intentionally designed in the same way that we intentionally design an amazing customer experience. And we always look for opportunities to improve the customer experience and make our customers happier and make our customers reach the goal that they're trying to achieve more easily and be more loyal to us. It's exactly the same inside our companies. And so I think that the fact that more designers are getting into culture and people experience, and the fact that, you know, employee experience or people experience is a role that people are hiring for, and the fact that there are more and more leadership teams that have the whole leadership team talking about culture. Like, your CFO can talk about culture. Like, it's not like anti-money. If anything, if you have a good culture, it can save you money and make you money if it's feeding the business. So I think that shift to culture being seen as something more tangible and something that is actually a competitive advantage for a business is the biggest kind of positive shift for me.
What about things like, because I've seen, especially with startups that maybe get their first round of funding or second round of funding, the benefits that they offer, so things like unlimited holiday, things like permanently work from home, and all these things, or like there's a lot of benefits that they include, like for startups. Now, does that impact the culture, or is that just, I don't know, like what is that, and where does that fit into everything?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think your culture should inform the benefits that you put in place. I also think that people are really challenging what it means to have a benefit and a perk these days. Like, you know, maternity and paternity leave shouldn't be a benefit. That should just be a human right. That should be something that is expected. It shouldn't be like, oh, look, I get more days here and less days here. I think like that's kind of missing the point. So I think that if you want to practice what you preach and you want to be authentic in what you do, then you should be saying, okay, so our values are X, Y, Z. Like, let's say, for example, you had a value that was around flexibility and you didn't have something around flexibility in your benefits, then that is conflicting. And I think that it's also about looking beyond what flexibility means. So an example that I often use is Patagonia, right? So their founder wrote a book called Let My People Go Surfing, which kind of talks about his philosophy on like flexibility in work. So I believe that Patagonia had quite a interesting way of like looking at breaks and like taking time in your day to like do your hobby, whether it's like mountaineering or surfing or running or whatever. And so I think that it's not just about your perks and your benefits. I think that's one thing, and they should reflect your values and your culture. It's also about your ways of working, because if, you know, a company like Patagonia, who believes in the outdoors and people experiencing it and living their hobbies, if they had back-to-back meetings, then that would undermine their belief that people should be able to go and be out in nature in the middle of their day. So I think that it's about authenticity and alignment in all of those things that you're offering to someone.
Got you. Yeah, because I always wondered like if those things ever impacted like culture or productivity or anything. It's an interesting one, because I feel like as these startups have evolved, they become more, I don't know what the word is, but they offer more benefits to their employees, which I mean, I really like because it looks really cool, but I always thought like, what's the actual impact for the culture, like offering those things? And I did read a study around like things like unlimited holiday. Ended up people actually took less holiday than, so like 25 days is the standard. They actually took less than 25 if you had unlimited holiday, which is a very interesting thing. But then you sort of think, if you went under the bonnet, why are people taking less time? Do they feel like if they take like less time, they're seen as like more productive and taking holidays as like a sign of weakness, perhaps? I don't know, because so I don't know. There's things that they say, but there's maybe things that maybe are going wrong under the bonnet if like it's enforced in the wrong way.
Yeah, and this is why another pillar of great culture is actually well-being. So having an understanding and an approach for protecting people's energy, because especially in the early stages, the founder's energy, your team's energy is like one of the most important resources, right? Because that's what's going to get you over the line. And it's not saying that you can't like work really, really hard and you can't have those days where it's like an all-nighter and things like that. But it's about saying, well, how are you going to look after people? Because that's unsustainable. You can't work people like that consistently and expect the same results. So I think the unlimited holiday thing is an interesting one, because often people are like, oh yeah, that sounds great. Yeah. You're absolutely right. Like people end up taking less. I'm more interested in like, what's your minimum expectation for people taking holiday? What about moments of like shared rest? So I know that there's quite a few companies that have like 2 weeks or a couple of weeks off each year where the entire company is off at the same time. Again, there's always going to be people that are like, I don't want to be restricted on when I take my time off. And that's not for them. But for a lot of people, that would actually be a really great thing and a thing that they would love. So I'm excited to see more creative ways of like practicing what you preach, and rather than things that sound really good on paper, but in reality, they're like not having that desired outcome.
Yeah, I think unlimited holiday was one of those ones where on the surface looks incredible because it's like, wow, I can take as much time as I want. But then it's like, if you actually look at the stats, the data, it's not the case, which is an interesting one. Natalie, I'm going to wrap up the podcast there, but it's been such a pleasure having you on and talking about this stuff. It's really opened my eyes actually, because I didn't really, when I first started my business, I never really thought about culture at all, because I think we talked about it at the beginning, but I was always thinking about product and strategy and building an MVP and getting our first customer and all this type of thing, which obviously is very important. But the foundation of building a good culture, whether you do it badly or well, definitely impacts the future of your business.
Yeah.
So it's definitely opened my eyes. How can people stay in touch with you and what you're doing?
So I hang out on LinkedIn a lot. So you can find me, Natalie Pearce. I usually have a apricot background, so that often helps. You can also take a look at our website, so www.thefuturekind.co. And on there, you'll be able to sign up to our newsletter where we're always sharing like frameworks and tools that you can like put into place straight away. So yeah, that's how to find me.
All right, fantastic. Well, thank you so much again for coming on the podcast, and I'm sure we'll chat very soon. Thank you. Thank you so much for clicking on this episode of The Millennial Entrepreneur. The ambition of the podcast is to share relatable stories from young entrepreneurs doing some incredible things to inspire the next generation, including you listening wherever you are. We've been doing this podcast for over 3 years, and the ambition has not changed. The only thing that has changed is the scale of where we want to go. We want to bring on bigger guests for you guys to show more and more relatable stories from young entrepreneurs across the world. The majority of you guys watching or listening haven't subscribed to the podcast yet. All you have to do is click that subscribe button wherever you're listening, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, and that will allow us to bring on bigger guests and ask the questions that you really want to hear. And it really is that simple.